Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Kevin Martin. I'm the Managing Director for the Digital Education Futures Initiative, which is a translational research center based at Hughes Hall here at the University of Cambridge. It has been nearly 70 years since the advent of artificial intelligence. For much of that time, the impact of AI on day-to-day life has been marginal, and the potential of AI to reshape our quotidian experience has been the realm of science fiction. Yet the recent advances in computing power and the subsequent widespread release of generative AI and large language model systems encompasses a force that very well may be heralding a new technological era. The ripples of this force are being felt across society, but most profoundly in education, where generative AI has raised fundamental questions that are beginning to remake our conception of education. And like so many disruptive forces, we are faced with challenges and opportunities that are framed by the questions we struggle to answer. How do we ensure more equitable access to these technologies? What are the implications for the traditional roles of educators and students? How do we navigate the ethical minefields of data privacy, intellectual property, and the potential for bias within AI systems? And perhaps most pressingly for our sixth form students here today, how do we prepare our students for a future in which AI is not a mere tool, but a ubiquitous presence in their personal and professional lives? So today, the Wilberforce Society has gathered a distinguished panel of experts from various corners of higher education who have been facing these questions head on. And each of today's panelists brings a unique perspective to our discussion. And together, we hope to explore the nuances of AI's role in higher education, make better sense of the challenges and opportunities, and have an idea of how higher education must adapt to this technology, as well as education in general. So thank you all for joining us today. I have a list of questions that I will be asking our panelists, which cover a range of themes related to AI and education. And then, as we approach the top of the hour, I will open up questions to the audience. But with that, we will get started. My first question today is a general one. We have been here today in varying degrees. So MOOCs have been democratizing education. Gamification is a pathway to increase student engagement. Virtual reality and the Google Cardboard bringing the world to the classroom. Yet each of these technologies represents a history of hype followed by underwhelming and mixed educational impact. So my first question today is generative AI another such technology, or are we dealing with something entirely different? And Professor Vera, I think that's a good one for you to start with.
Thank you, Kevin. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for the invitation to join this panel. So I think we're still waiting to find out. I think to say that we know fully what artificial intelligence means for the education system and whether we can arrive at a conclusive response to your particular question, it's too early to say. We can see that there are some things that are fundamentally different to what we've experienced before, especially the speed of change that we've experienced in the last 12 months. People have been surprised at how quickly things have evolved. So there does seem to be a suggestion that we're in a slightly different position, but equally, as you're saying, and I guess in this place as well as any other, it sort of gets to the heart of what is an education for, and then how does the education system adapt to the new tools and technologies that are available, which is sort of where your sort of earlier part of the question, which is, is it similar to things we've seen before? And clearly, education has been taking place in different forms for over 1,000 years or longer. So we have adapted to a continual evolution of technology. The core purpose of education then starts to become more crystal as the core question, which is what is education for, and then how does that technology change the nature of that education?
Thank you, and I invite any of our other panelists to comment on that question.
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. Thank you. It's great to be here today. I would agree. I would say we're not quite there yet in terms of a definitive answer. And before this talk, I did a little interesting thought experiment and looked at the history of, I would say, freakouts about tech in education. And there was a great New York Times article from 2000 which said lessons in internet plagiarism, and basically said that the rise of Hotmail was going to be the end of education as we know it. So we have been here before in some respects, but also I would say this is a qualitative shift in the paradigm. Just the number of students who are using AI. You look at studies, Turnitin commissioned a study in the US. There was a study in the Nature Journal recently that over 50% of university students, some say 75% of university students, are now using AI as part of their studies in varying degrees. And what was really interesting in the Turnitin study was, I think about 75%, 80% of students said that they would keep using it even if universities were to impose restrictions on use or were to ban it outright. So there's that element, and then you contrast that with the view from, I don't know what my esteemed colleagues think today, but there's the view from the kind of academia side and the faculty side where there hasn't been a mass uptake as far as we can see. Far fewer academics are using it and far fewer academics condone the use of AI. So there's that contrast. There's the number of people using it. There's the differing views between faculty and students. And from my perspective, I think what's really interesting is this isn't like email or Wikipedia or anything else we've seen, because this is generative AI is stress testing every legal boundary or every conceivable legal boundary. I mean, there are the obvious ones: IP, copyright, patents, plagiarism, but it goes far beyond that. There's equalities, there's biases, there's employment law, there's even image rights, reputation management, defamation. So, and as lawyers, at least where I'm working at the moment, we're not scratching our heads, but I don't want to sell myself short here, but there are a lot of unanswered questions, especially from an English legal perspective.
Again, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here today. I just to agree with everything that's said, it is clearly too early to know exactly what it's going to mean. But I do feel we can say it's going to be more than just a flash in the pan, because it's so embedded in how people are now working on a day-to-day basis. We're not going to go back to people not using generative AI. I think what's not known is how progressive it's going to be and exactly how far it's going to take us. But it's not going to be something like MOOCs that sort of seems like it's going to go really big, but then really disappear and don't have such a great impact. I think it's gone far beyond that already.
Thank you, and echo everyone's thanks for inviting me. I guess the only things I might add to what colleagues have already said is in the sort of same but different vein. I think what is different here is the degree of personalization that you can have with generative AI. And if you think of each one of us in this room and an essay we might have to write, we'll get some common things right, but we'll have different gaps, potentially different strengths and different gaps. And obviously an LLM can be very smart at individualizing and personalizing that response in a way that perhaps historically has not been available. And I think that's important, because if you step back and say, what are some of the problems that we're trying to solve in using these tools? I guess for me anyway, the biggest one is to close the attainment gap, whether that be a socio-economic attainment gap or a kind of special educational needs and disabilities kind of attainment gap. And I think of that not just in attainment in terms of exam results, although I do think of it in terms of exam results, but also in terms of kind of confidence, aspiration, careers, and kind of life chances. So it feels like there's something different in the personalization that might be able to unlock some of the attainment gap, and that is obviously a good thing in the words of 1066 and all that. And then I suppose the other thing, and I try and make this as simple as possible for myself, not for anyone else, but I think you can sort of divide it into three buckets. Technology that does existing things faster, and in a way that write me my 500-word essay, or in my case, draft me an answer to a parliamentary question. Sometimes it gets it right, sometimes not so good. But existing faster feels a bit like where we are now. The sort of bit that I think is interesting are where these tools could do new things that we are unable to do today. So to give an example, when I met with a head of English in a school, and she was talking about at the weekends after the mock GCSE English language exam, she will sit at home and spend all weekend trying to map the results of, I think there's 4 questions in an English language GCSE. She'll map all 4 and try and work out where the gaps are, have different classes attain differently, etc. And then she said at the end of it, she produces 160 identical revision booklets. Well, clearly with an LLM, you could have 160 individualized. So that's the new powers. And then I guess the last bucket in my head, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, is the bad actors. But I guess it's this idea of personalization and doing things we couldn't previously do that might be different this time.
Thank you all for those thoughts.